have as a reader to be looking for the theme. Very much like when you read a book. Every book is written based on themes within every chapter. So you have this book called In Pursuit of Justice, the jurisprudence of human rights in Islam. Okay? This is the main theme. But there are 11 themes to serve that theme. If you keep that in mind, it will be easy to read the Quran after that. Very easy, actually. Why? So let's say in Surah Al-Mu'minun, the believers, that's the title. The theme is to give you the characteristics of believers and the faithful. What makes a faithful person? So the Quran would pick up a story from Moses that talks about faith and puts it there. Then it will pick up something Mary did to show her faithfulness and puts it there. Then it picks up a story from Joseph and puts it there. If you add all of those stories, they will all contribute to the theme of that chapter. So the Quran is not trying to be scattered all over or to one you all over, but rather to back up a specific argument, a specific theme with a specific chapter that you are reading. So that's fine. That's number two. Number three, again, very much like when you read a book, you have an introduction. Sorry?
Move the mouse.
The mouse?
Don't want the projector to fall asleep.
I'm not even, this is all appetizer, guys. Very much like when you read a book. You have an introduction, you have a conclusion, and you have an argument in between that backs up both. Every time you read a chapter, a surah in the Quran, that's what you should be looking for. The first ayah, the first verse, ayah, A-Y-A-H, for those of you who don't know Arabic or don't know much about Islam. I use the word surah. That means chapter, ayah, that's verse. The first verse is the introduction. The last verse is the conclusion. Very much like a book. Actually, someone I think needs to do a study of why or how we ended up writing books the way we do in the West. Is it because of the influence of Islam? Maybe. I'm not saying this, by the way. But that could be the case, but that's exactly how the Quran was written 1400 years ago, or it came about. So that's number two. Number 4 point is the last verse, hear me carefully, the last verse in the chapter usually introduces you to the first verse in the chapter that comes after it. Why? Because we say that the order of the chapters is tawqifi. Tawqifi. Tawqifi means decided by God, not by us. How so? We'll talk about that later, as to how we Muslims believe that. But that's exactly what it is. So now, if you want to really understand the whole Quran and you don't have the time to read the whole Quran, read the first chapter, the first verse, and the last verse of every chapter, put them together. Believe me, that will end up becoming a Quran. I know, no one ever told you that, even the Muslims, yeah? But that's really the summary of what the Quran is all about. I'm not trying to say it's as simple as that, but that's what it is. The Quran is very systematically authored, very organized, thematically organized, and sometimes you need to find what is the theme of that. What is the theme? So how do you find about the theme? It could be the name of the surah, the name of the chapter. It could be one word in the first verse or one word in the last verse. Or it could be the most repeated words in that chapter. So when I do halaqas, when I do my own circles of education for my friends, that's what I do. I really give them a hard time. So, okay, let's read, and let's actually write and survey what's the most repeated term in that chapter. And is it repeated in the past sentence, or the present, or the future? And why? And is there are there three terms that seem to be repeated more than any other terms in that chapter? Okay? And that gives you an idea about the theme of that chapter. So Surah Al-Baqarah, Surah 2, the calf, talks about, it mentioned the story of the cow, of Moses, but not in more than a page. While this is the largest chapter in the Quran. So the name of the chapter does not really mean a lot when you first look at it. But it does if you understand what the story really represents for Moses, and what happened with him and his brother Aaron. And what's the lesson that comes out of the story of the calf? The idea of obedience to God, the idea of listening, the idea of learning. So Surah 2, chapter 2, is really a chapter whose main theme is how you can learn from your previous experiences to increase your faith. That's the main theme of Surah 2. Through, in this case, the story of Moses. So what does Moses represent to Muslims? To increase, to empower their faith. That's what I'm talking about. Of course, the story of Abraham comes into the picture. The story of Jesus comes into it, or a reference to. A reference to Mary comes in for only one line. A reference to Noah comes in for only 2 lines. But the main focus is Moses. Now, as I move further, I want to say this, that 2/3 of the Quran is narratives. 2/3. 2/3 of the narratives are about either Jesus or Moses, but number one, Moses. If you take Moses' narratives from the Quran will end up very small, slim book that you can put in your pocket, actually. But why? It's quite a wonderful question to ask. And I think it's because if you really study Judaism and Islam, you see so many similarities in so many ways. In terms of how God is referred to, in terms of the presence of halakha, law, and sharia, both of which, by the way, mean path. Halakha is the Hebrew word for path, and sharia is the Arabic word for path. So your path to God goes through the law. In terms of their history, of how they approach the text, the Islamic relationship with the Quran is quite amazing. If you come to my home, there are about 13,000 books in my basement. Almost 20% of those are books of interpretation of the Quran. Okay. Including I have the Zohar that I put next to one of these books to compare between the Jewish mysticism and references to God and faith and morality and spirituality in the Quran. Quite amazing when you do these comparisons. With Jews here, if we have any, you might be surprised for me to be saying that. But don't be surprised. But also, the Quran is telling Muslims, follow the footsteps of Jews when they did it well, but don't do it when they did it wrong. Did they do wrong? Well, they did. But Muslims did wrong too. So the Quran wants us to learn from the experience of our brothers and sisters in the Jewish faith. So where have they failed? And where have they done well? Capitalize on the good, learn from it, don't repeat it. Repeat it. Don't repeat the bad and the wrong, and keep moving. In a way, the Jewish story becomes a lesson for us Muslims. Quite interesting. Maybe many of you have never saw it that way. The Quran says that exactly word by word, by the way, in so many of the surahs, in so many of its chapters. And a very well-known scholar, and Pakistani scholar, Imam Ahmed, wrote a book about this. It's called The Rise and Fall of Islam, of Muslim civilization, I think. I think that's the title. When he talks about that Muslims, if they want to do well in their lives and in their understanding of their faith, they have to really understand the history of Judaism. But also talks about how Jews and Muslims have so many similar comparisons in terms of how they approach their faith and their history and how they did not, how they failed and how they did not. Quite interesting. But that's a chapter on its own, a lecture on its own. Enough said appetizer, yeah? No appetizer, we're not getting the lecture yet. Now, to move forward, I want to say, my friends, my name is Yahya Hendi, for those who are here for the first time. I have not attended the last 2 sessions and trainings, or classes, or seminars. I'm the Muslim chaplain here at Georgetown University. I tell people when they realize I do have a heavy accent. I have an accent only because I learned English in Texas. They blame Texas for it, please don't blame me. I am originally from dust to dust, ashes to ashes, so my citizenship is Dustonian. I come from Turab, from dust. So are all of us. So we're all brothers and sisters, we're all sisters and brothers of the same Mother Earth, of the same citizenship. So that's the way I approach the Qur'an, by the way, and the way I do politics, and the way I do my ministry at Georgetown. But the dust from which I came was historically by Arabs and Muslims called Palestine. So I come from a Palestinian background, from Nablus, and did my undergrad and first master's degree education in Jordan in the science of the Quran, but tafsir was my specialty. This is why I cannot stop talking about this topic. That has always fascinated me. When I came to the US, I did my work of master's and PhD work in Christian and Jewish studies. This is why I like to do these comparisons. Been here for 13 years, married, have 4 kids, and that's enough. I wanted, if we had the time, but it's only 35 minutes passing, to have an idea about who you are, but it will help me, but I'm not going to do that now, at least for the sake of time. So let's jump into the discussion here. And any questions for me? Good. Don't even dare ask me questions. Arab dictatorship is brought to its presence. Okay.
Like the lights off for the PowerPoint?
I think it would be good.
Okay, sure.
What is Ulum al-Quran? What is Ulum al-Quran? This seminar is called Ulum al-Quran, the sciences of the Quran. It is the knowledge that deals with the sciences that have a direct bearing on the recitation, history, understanding, and implementation of the Quran. So it's a full discipline. And within the Muslim world, you can have a bachelor's, master's, or a PhD degree in just this discipline. So it's a big discipline. I'm trying to summarize it in 3.5 hours. Imagine. It's a big discipline. Anything that deals with the history of the Quran, how it's recited, why, and the understanding of that. With regard to recitation, this deals with the pronunciation and tajweed. It is how you sing the Quran, how you read it publicly. And there are ways by which you do that. And this is, by the way, the most difficult PhD to do. Some people have PhDs only in this line, in the science of tajweed. And I studied tajweed myself under one of those very tough ones in Amman, who studied in Egypt and in Morocco. Basically how to recite the Quran. There are ways by which you recite the Quran in terms of the length of the vowel, the shortness of the vowel, and the impact of that on those who hear it. The methodologies of recitation called qira'at. And by qira'at we mean so many things, including some terms, some words in the Quran are recited differently within the same verse. give an example. If you are reading Surah Al-Fatiha, Surah 1, you come across a verse in it called Maliki Yawmiddin, speaking of God, Maliki Yawmiddin. If you go to Morocco or into West Africa or Central Africa, you will not hear the word Maliki Yawmiddin, you hear the word Maliki Yawmiddin. Why? Because Muslims would say that the Quran was revealed in such a way with both readings. So it came to Muhammad, to the Prophet Muhammad, upon him be peace, in that specific way, meaning with two different recitations. Now what's the difference? Maliki, with the long vowel, means owner. So God is the owner of the day of judgment. Malik, again, those of you who know Hebrew, you know, I know some too. Malik, Melech, king. So God being the king of the day of judgment. So two different meanings about God within one word. Now, what do? I have done it with either Malik and I have done it with either Malik. It's what you choose to do. And both are readings within the Quran. So they are not new inventions. The problem is this.